Hey there, drone fans. Rick here again from Drone Valley. In today's clip, I'll cover the new FAA interim final rule that was posted this week in the Federal Register that changes the way you have to label your quads with your FAA registration number. Now, it was a really simple change, but I got a ton of questions from you guys asking about why they made the change, and I understand that anytime the FAA changes the rules, people get a little nervous about drones and what are they doing next and what's it all about. So I'll talk a little bit about why they made the change. I don't think it's that big a deal. But I also got a lot of questions about the registration process itself. I understand there's a lot of new flyers out there that were confused about when they have to register their quad, or even if they have to do that, and what does it cost, and where do I go to do that. So I thought I'd cover that process again for those new flyers out there so you guys are in compliance. The bottom line is if you're flying a quad that's more than 0.55 pounds all the way up to 55 pounds, you have to register the quad. Really simple process, really low cost, and I'll get into that in a minute. But before I get too deep into it, I thought I'd give you the basics on the ruling in case you wanted to go look it up yourself, because it takes effect February 25th, so about a week from now it'll be effective. But it's called an interim final rule, which is really an oxymoron because it's either an interim rule or a final rule. But the reason it's an interim final rule means that it's actually in effect as of February 25th, but there's a public comment period up until March 25th where you can contact the FAA and give them a lot of grief if you think this rule doesn't make a lot of sense, and they listen to that stuff. So if there's a gigantic public outcry about a change they're going to make in one of these interim final rules, they'll listen to that and they may change that ruling. In this particular case, I don't think they will, because as a flyer and a responsible flyer, it makes sense to me why they made the change, and I'll explain why in a minute. But if you want to complain, I'll give you the details on how to do that. So let's start with the basics. The first thing you'll need is the rule number itself, and that's RIN 2120-AL32. Now, if you pop that into your search bar, it'll take you right to the rule itself, and you can read through it to understand exactly what you have to do to stay in compliance. Now, again, this is an FAA interim final rule, which is confusing because final and interim mean different things, but essentially what this means is the FAA has the ability to put a mandate out there to change a rule in the interim while they're asking for public comment. Typically what they'll do is put a proposal out to say, hey, we're thinking of changing these things. We want to hear from the public as to whether you guys think it's a good idea or not. And none of that stuff becomes law or mandated until they get all that public opinion, then they make a decision. In this case, they felt that the change was important enough that it outweighed that public comment period. So they instituted the change, but still have 30 days of comments that they're going to gather from the public, because if they made a mistake and the public really is outraged about this, they may change their decision. And then I guess it becomes a final rule. I don't know. But anyway, it does go live February 25th. So if you fly after February 25th and you're not in compliance with this regulation, you could be in trouble if somebody comes up to you and asks you about why you didn't change the labeling structure on your quads. The public comment period, though, is open until March 25th. So they give a 30-day window after the official thing takes place on February 25th all the way through March 25th. So you still have a couple of weeks if you want to, send them a letter and say, hey, I think this is a dumb idea. Here's the reasons why. And they really do listen to this stuff. I know they've taken a ton of public comments before on different changes they were proposing. Some they put through and some they didn't, or some they modified so they weren't as dramatic as they originally thought they'd be. So if you want to look into this a little bit further, punch that number in. It's an RIN 2120-AL32, and I'll put a link below in the comments section where you can follow that if you will. Now that you know where to go to get more information on the rule change, and you understand the date it becomes effective and how long you have for public comment, I thought I would talk about the rule change specifically because it's a really simple one, and I'll also give you some ideas of maybe why they made the change, because I think it's an important one, and I really don't think it's that big a deal. So the ruling states that from now on, from February 25th on, your FAA number has to be attached to the quad, could be written, could be a label, on an external surface that somebody can see just by walking up to the quad. Now, before the ruling became effective, you could put that label anywhere you wanted on the quad, and a lot of us put it inside the battery compartment. And the reason for that is we weren't trying to be sneaky or get away with anything, but that label over time will fade and the weather's going to get at it. So I just didn't want to be changing the label every 3 or 4 months, so I stuck it inside the battery compartment. Anybody needed to see it because my quad crashed in their field or whatever, they could pop the battery out and get at it. So it wasn't a big deal to have it inside the battery compartment, but the change was really prompted by first responders, who we have to have a lot of respect for, finding a quad in the field and then worrying that that quad might be kind of a dangerous device. We live in kind of dangerous times, and there's a lot of knuckleheads out there that want to do bad things. So can you imagine being a rescue worker that got a report of a quad crashing in a field, and they show up and there's the quad, and they're not sure if that quad might have a improvised explosive device inside of it. And I'm not walking up to it pulling a battery out of it, because if I do, I might explode the device. So they wanted to know if a quad was in a field they would treat it differently if they couldn't see the FAA registration number on it. Because if my quad came down in the field, obviously it's a dummy label on there, but my registration's on there, they could immediately dial that up on the registration database and know that Rick was the guy flying that quad and he lives over here and here's his phone number. So they could call me and say, hey Rick, are you missing a quad? Because we found one out here in the field. If there's no registration number, they're going to treat that quad completely differently. They're going to look at it as a possible problem, and they're going to really be concerned about it and have to treat it with maybe a bomb squad and police and fire and rescue. So it becomes a whole big deal for them not having that FAA registration on there. So I think it's a great idea for them to do that. For me, it's not that big a deal. Now, I use the stick-on labels. I use a label maker to make them, and I put them right on the top of the quad. It's very easy to get at. Now, again, these are all dummy numbers because I didn't want you guys getting my registration numbers, but the real number would be on there normally. One thing I would suggest is don't write it on your quad in indelible ink, because even though it's easier and cheaper to do that and it's a quick way to get away with putting the number on there, you may eventually want to trade up that quad for something else later on, and you'll never get that number off there, and no one's going to want to buy a quad with the number scratched out. So if you can use a label, that would be great. One other way you could do it that I've suggested to some people is if you've got the larger Phantom quads, you can actually write the registration number on the blades, because if you're going to sell a quad, it's really easy to pop a prop off and change it with another prop later on. And that works pretty well, because if it crashes, you can see one of the 4 props and actually read that number. And even if they're black props like this, you can get one of those specialty white markers that'll write on there, and it's not that big a deal. But put the number on there, just get it done and be done with it, and then you'll have no issues going forward. One other thing I'd suggest, and something I do on my quads, is maybe set up a brand new email address. You can go on Google and get a free email address, in 30 seconds. Get an email address and put a second label on there that says reward dash and that email address. So heaven forbid this thing flies away on you and lands someplace and you've searched for it for 3 or 4 days and can't find it. If some good citizen comes along and finds it and sees the email on there, they may say, holy smokes, a reward. Well, they're thinking I could keep the quad for myself, but then I've got to buy a controller. Let's just assume they're really honest, like most of us are, and they're going to say, sure, I'd love to get in touch with this guy. They're going to email you and say, hey, I found your quad in the field. Do you want to come and get it? And what's the reward all about? And you can decide what that reward's going to be. It doesn't take much sometimes to make people happy for doing the right thing. So just a second thought on that. I do that with all my quads because I don't want to put my home address on there necessarily, because people are weird, right? And if I lose a quad and it lands in somebody's backyard, I just don't want them showing up at my front door with their quad in their hand, really angry that I crashed in their backyard. So an email's a lot easier, because that way, even if they are mad that the quad crashed in their backyard, I'm getting an angry email instead of an angry guy at my front door. So just a thought. Anyway, that's it for the labeling. Now, next I'm going to talk about the registration process, because I'm a huge fan of playing by the rules. And I know I'll probably get some heat because a lot of people out there are saying it's government intervention. Why are they making us register the quads? What's the big deal? Can't I just fly my quad? You have to think about it. I mean, there are rules for everything. If you own a dog, you got a dog license. If you have a boat, you got to get a registration for that. If you own a gun, you got to be registered. So things like quads, they're not mandating, that you come and take a test with them and make sure you can fly and talk to people. You basically just register the quad. It's a very simple process to do. You're within the law by doing that. And I don't think it's like they're creating some master database. They're going to come and grab our quads down the road. I don't think that's happening. But either way, it's the law. So if you're flying a quad, you got to register your quad. So next I'm going to talk about the different classes of flyers that are out there, because that's confusing to people, because with the FAA reauthorization bill that went through last year, they kind of squashed 2 of those categories together, which has some people up in arms, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then specifically how you register the quad, I'll give you the URL and I'll talk about the process. So stay tuned and we'll get into that next. I'll start with the basics of registration. If you plan on operating any type of remote-controlled aircraft in the U.S. that doesn't have a physical pilot on board, that aircraft is considered a UAV, or an unmanned aerial vehicle, and you're required by law to register that aircraft with the FAA. Now, depending on the type of flying you're doing, you'll fall into one of 3 main categories that are recognized by the FAA, and how you register that vehicle will vary based on the category you're in. The first category, which most of us fall into, includes recreational flyers and what are called modelers that build their own aircraft that are part of a community-based organization. So if you buy something off the shelf, pop a battery in it and want to go fly it, or if you build it yourself and want to put it up in the air, that's the first category, and that's the basic registration I'm going to talk about next. The next level up is a certified remote pilot, and that includes commercial operators. Now, to get that certification, you've got to take what's called a Part 107 test, and a lot of people that want to fly commercially will join that group. The third category are government and law enforcement operators that are out flying around fires, or maybe they're doing rescue work. It's a different classification again, and there are rules that are different for them as far as no-fly zones and where and when they can fly. But you'll fall into one of those three categories. But for the purposes of today's clip, I'm going to focus on that first group, which includes recreational flyers and modelers, so we all understand what the basis for registering those type of vehicles is. The process of registration is incredibly simple. You can do everything you need to do online in about 10 minutes, and it'll cost you $5 a quad, which quite honestly is less expensive and way less hassle than getting a dog tag. So go there, in a couple of mouse clicks you'll have them registered. Now, to get started, you'll need to know what the website is, because there are a lot of websites out there that are kind of scam websites that look to draw you in to pretend that it's a really big deal to register your quad, and you could spend a lot more money than you have to. So don't put FAA registration in your search bar, because you're going to get a bunch of hokey websites out there trying to take your money. Where you need to go is FAA Drone Zone. .faa.gov. Now, I've got a link below in case you didn't hear what I said there, but go to that website. You'll notice it's an FAA official website. It's a $5 fee to register your drone. Now, the first thing you have to do is identify the kind of flyer you are. Now, most of us will be in that first category I mentioned. When you click on that, you'll enter some basic information, some credit card details, and you'll pay for the registration. You'll have it for 3 years. So the rules are simple. If your quad is between 0.55 pounds and 55 pounds, you've got to register it. If it's lighter than that, you don't have to worry about registering it, but if it falls in that band of weight, you've got to register the quad. It's $5 per quad. It used to be $5 for all your quads, and they changed that, I guess, when this reauthorization bill went through, but still $5 for a registration for a quad that might have cost you $300, $400 is probably less money than you spend charging the batteries to fly that quad. So I know $5's not free, but it's not really that big a deal. So $5 a quad, and then you get it for 3 years. So once you register it, you've got 36 months of that registration being active, and then you have to re-register it again at the end of 3 years. So my recommendation is go there, do the registration, just be done with it. Once you get that registration number, you get a nice little card that shows you the registration number. I carry that with me in my case so that if I'm out at a park and somebody wants to know if my quad's been registered, I can show them I've got that card. You have to mark it externally, like I'd mentioned before with this new regulation that came into effect. Just print it out or take a marker and write it on the outside of the quad. Then you're in compliance. There's no issues there. Now, it's not like a lot of people are worrying, well, someday they're going to outlaw quads and they're going to come to my house and ask me for my quads back, and that's why they're putting the database together. It's not that at all. The FAA needs to know that there's a large contingent of us hobbyists out there that are flying these quads, because the rules around commercial operations, where guys like Amazon and FedEx and UPS are looking to fly commercially in that space, when they understand that there's a lot of flyers like us out there that are hobbyists, we have a big voice. So when they start thinking about changing those rules, they realize, holy smokes, we've got hundreds of thousands of hobbyists out there flying these quads. This is a pretty important contingent for us. Let's ask them what they think. So it's important as a group that we're registered and they understand there's large numbers that are having a lot of fun flying these quads very safely out there. So my opinion on it is, I'm not a big fan of government regulation. I don't think this makes that big a difference for me to register it. Nobody out there knows that this number applies to Rick. They just know that it's an FAA number, and if they need to get a hold of me, they can have somebody official, go in there, use that number to find out who I am, to contact me about maybe something goofy I've done. Now, I will tell you an interesting thing that happened to me recently. I fly a lot with my job, and I always take a quad with me. Some of these guys are always on an airplane with me. I've never had an issue going through security, but recently I went through security, and they actually asked me to show them the registration number on the quad. Kind of interesting. Now, I don't know if that's something that's common across the country or it was just one guy being a smart aleck, but I had my Mavic with me. It was a couple of weeks ago. I actually took it out, pulled out the battery, and showed them the registration number. So I'm not trying to scare you, but I think more people are becoming aware of the fact that these should be registered. And I agree that if you're flying it, not a bad idea to register it. So that's pretty much all I had today. I hope you got the information you needed. If I've missed anything, drop it in the comments below. But my recommendation, my strong recommendation, because it's the law, is that you register your quads. It takes a couple of minutes, $5, and you're done with the whole process. You don't have to worry about it again for 3 years, and you'll have a good time flying and not have that pressure of not having a registered quad up in the air. So that's pretty much it for today. Thanks an awful lot for watching. I hope you guys are finding value in these clips. I love putting them together. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button down there and turn on notifications. I have a lot of stuff coming that you're going to want to really see. A lot of interesting things coming up. So you'll definitely want to be part of the Drone Valley family. You can do that by joining the family by registering and subscribing to the channel. So anyway, thanks again for watching. Until next time, happy flying.